Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. Once again, I'm joined here by lovely Meg from Meg Reviews, and we're continuing our discussion of the new Jedi Order. Very quick reminder for fans who are joining us perhaps for the first time, what is the new Jedi Order? It's a huge publishing initiative which began in the old days of Star Wars Legends, and it ran from 1999 all the way to 2003. It's a collection of 19 adult novels, some ebooks, and some novellas, and some related comic books as well. It covers the storyline of the expanded universe, and as of 2014 is no longer considered Star Wars canon. Thus, we call it Star Wars Legends. And it portrays the events of 21 till 25 years after the events of the original Star Wars trilogy. And we see the journey of Luke Skywalker reestablishing the Jedi Order while these intergalactic invaders, the Yuzong Vong, take over. Meg, once again, it's really lovely to see you. You are quite a contrast to that very morbid Coruscant in battle background. What's going on? Tell me, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yeah, I love my beautiful background that you were able to make into like a widescreen thing for me because it's an image I believe from the new Jedi Order source book for the role-playing game. But I was like, oh, that's so awesome. I want to use it.
Have you dabbled in any of like Star Wars tabletop games?
I have not. I've read some of the source books just because they have like a lot of reference material and then some like fiction in it. But I've never actually like played any of them.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Some of the authors I got the privilege to interview, Kenneth Flint, they were mentioning that so those earlier source books and tabletop games actually gave them a lot of references of how to start developing the expanded universe. Meg, I wanted us to start with a couple of general questions. I was viewing your stuff that you were doing with Stevie, or your own podcast there, and a couple of things I just wanted to mention. As far as reading habits go, do you prefer physical books versus e-readers? And do you prefer hardcovers for like collecting perhaps, or, regular paperbacks would suffice for you?
Yeah, I think I prefer to read ebooks just because I am the kind of person that makes my font as large as possible.
Hmm.
My sister and I once, we took a really funny picture. We were both reading on our Kindles at an airport and we held them next up to each other and my font was like 400% bigger than hers.
Yeah.
So I do like reading ebooks just for that. I can make them so big, they always remember where you left off.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I do switch back and forth between like an actual physical book and an e-reader, just like for sheer convenience.
Hmm.
And for reading, I prefer hardcovers. I just, longevity reasons, they are going to last far longer than mass market paperbacks. So
Hmm.
even sometimes I would have something mass market paperback, and then if I saw it in hardcover, like at a used bookstore or eBay or something, I would almost be like, okay, well, I'm gonna upgrade because I want to keep this. But with Star Wars, what that ends up being is you probably know that a lot of the paperbacks were only released as hardcovers for the science fiction book club, and like
Hmm.
they're 100% out of print now. It's hard to find them reasonably priced. So I do feel like sometimes I hold on to my paperbacks just because I'm not sure I can get a better version.
Yeah, when I was collecting the expanded universe books, I fortunately got to collect the full thing before they started, adding the Legends yellow little banner there,
Mhm.
which I don't mind at all. It actually looks
Yeah.
kind of cool to me. But also, I wasn't fully understanding of what was available in hard print, and that I'm like, and I'm such a purist. Like, okay, I started in this format, this size. Let me just keep going with it. Speaking of Kindle, Meg, I'm
Yes.
part of the tribe. I have my
Oh,
little Kindle here, and like yourself, for convenience's sake, I do enjoy it quite a lot. Especially, I read mostly before going to bed.
oh, and then the backlight is
Yeah, the
great for
backlight
that.
is amazing. So sometimes, even though I have like the full collection of my X-wing series,
Mhm.
I would sometimes alternate. I'm like, I gotta do this. I'm like, yes, paper. That smell. Like sometimes you want to go back and kind of like reminisce of the culture of reading actual physical books and preserving them. And I also enjoy hardcovers. I just acquired the Lord of the Rings illustrated version, which I
Mm.
dreamed of having. I finally have it. And these mostly are for me like showpieces or something that I would just sit down and have my full meditative reading session of actual physical books in my hand. Um, I mentioned earlier the conversation with Steve at DVB channel. Guys, I'm going to leave the link to his channel as well. It's awesome podcaster, and he has like really cool stuff going on there. I was really happy to see that you guys are kicking it together, having a really wonderful discussion. I'm more than halfway through your podcast, and I'm just like, I'm zoning out, man. I'm doing my own graphic design work, and I'm listening to you both. Obviously, you and I were well acquainted. We spoke before, and Steve as well. It feel like a wave of emergence of like smaller podcasts and YouTubers who just have this completely interesting look on Star Wars. I think it's all exciting. And one little detail that I wanted to mention there, you guys were speaking about the High Republic and how sometimes it's different to track, right? Because it's broken down into adult novels, and then the younger reader novels, and there's comic books, and like, oh my God, my head is going in 10 different places. But at one point, because you and I were both huge fans of what we're discussing today, the new Jedi Order, you didn't feel like they were trying to basically reenact the new Jedi Order in terms of its format? It's just like one huge storyline in the High Republic?
I think so. I think that after the new Jedi Order, Del Rey was basically chasing that high with the Legacy of the Force and then Fate of the Jedi, and now with this like multimedia project with it was Project Luminous, and now it's the High Republic,
Right.
where, you know, telling a story through not just many different novels, but just like a variety of formats. I guess for me, the new Jedi Order is a little different in that, you know, it's just all adult novels. There's a little bit of like the short stories and ebooks and then later comics, but it's mostly just the novels. This almost reminds me of like the Shadows of the Empire multimedia project, where we had, you know, a video game and
The radio
comics.
drama, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just because there's with the High Republic, there's so many different forms of content you have to keep up with to figure out what's going on when to get a like 100% complete view of the story.
Yeah, I kind of like washed my hands of trying to read everything on time, because I decided, like, what's more important for me? Compulsively reviewing every book just because it's out there. I need to compete with other channels. I'm like, that's not a way to go about it. What I'm going to do is enjoy it on my own reading time, get the fullest out of the book. And then I believe it's more responsible to present a more balanced perspective on the book. Say, look, I sat down, I paid my dues, I fully read this book. It's good or it's bad. I think it's going to be a more fair judgment of the book. That's what I do. I'm like, I just put it off, shelf it for whenever I want to read.
That's what I agree. And I think that's what ended up to me like sort of falling off, staying, current with the High Republic, was just that feeling of like having to read it before anyone else so you could get it out there. And I was like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah, like, unfortunately, adult life gets into what's really important, reading the Star Wars books, right? Like, oh my God, I don't have the time. Moving on to closer, actually, to our discussion today is, do you have any kind of preference over the early Bantam era Star Wars books versus the modern Star Wars? And I mean the prose, like the execution, versus that what some fans refer to as that cheesy 90s kind of like prose style.
I mean, on the one hand, that cheesy 90s, there is so much nostalgia for me there, because it's just like, it's almost like you crack open the book and you're like, I remember these words. And they may not always be like well phrased, but like some of them really stuck with me. And so I do think there's like a lot of nostalgia there, but I think at the same time, I can critically look at the Bantam books and say, like some of these authors are well suited to writing about Star Wars and some of them are not. And with the newer books, I feel like there's maybe more of an attempt to have like a unified style to make sure that like if you pick one up and you pick another one up, you're not going to see like those drastic, like it's not like picking up the Crystal Star. Like they're much more, not even continuity, but just like the way they've been written and edited makes them more similar, which I guess could make for an easier reading experience. But I have a very strong soft spot for the old days of just like how they would a lot of times just let anyone do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, for me, that era, I tend to lean, like, I really enjoy and appreciate the gritty and evolved kind of like prose, which makes the story so much believable. Like the Battlefront books, I don't know if you've read them, they're absolutely fantastic. They actually read a lot like Michael, Stackpole's X-Wing series, and Arn Alston as well, both of them. So it repeats that almost like Tom Clancy in space style of storytelling.
Ooh.
But I really, really enjoyed that early Bantam era. And I was kind of like meditating on it early on. What is it specifically about them? Yeah, it's the style and that very playful prose, which doesn't always take itself seriously, like Crystal Stars. A lot of these novels actually feel like fantasy in space. They fully embrace the fact that it's like, look, don't take it seriously. It's just old pulpy era, early 30s kind of like style fantasy storytelling. And it's just fun. But also one thing specifically that I appreciate, we live in such a diverse culture and everybody has these very specific look and list of demands as fans, and we can influence storytellers now to unprecedented point the way we never could before. But when you read this early Bantam era Star Wars novels, they just feel very organically involving. Maybe they weren't fully representative of, giving us more female characters like that, but it never felt like they were filling checklists. More female representation. We need all diversity. It doesn't feel constructed. So, and I appreciated the different voices that the authors had from book to book, different styles. I really enjoyed Children of the Jedi. Like some people were scratching their head over, like, what? A Jedi spirit stuck inside of the machine. I'm like, I kind of like that. I dig it. I enjoyed that one novel from the next one. They were so different from one another. I'm
like you. Children of the Jedi is one of my, despite the fact that like the ending on an ethical and moral level, I've said this many times, like, oh my, what a cluster.
Yeah.
But for me, Children of the Jedi was an entry point to Barbara Hambly's writing and just like opened up so influential for me. I love it so much.
And the cover is just dynamite. Amazing. It's just so romantic, right? Sorry, guys, I have a little glare there, a protective thing. But, oh, man, the Luke's likeness, like everything. Callista is exactly the way I imagined her in the book. I'm like, oh, it's such a good rendition. It's a beautiful, it actually was a recent acquisition. I got it off eBay. I'm such a purist. It had to be like completely perfect. Like, I need to preserve it. It needs to be perfect. Guys, before we start talking about the new Jedi Order specifically, I have to ask this question because it directly pertains to our discussion today. What do the Skywalker children from the Legends books, the Jedi twins, Jacen and Jaina, their younger sibling Anakin, and also Ben Solo later on, what do those kids mean to you personally in Star Wars?
I think for me, especially with the twins, with Jacen and Jaina, it felt like I grew up with them. That I was reading the Young Jedi Knights books and I was the same age as them. I was a teen. And then I'm reading the new Jedi Order books and you see them becoming adults. So it was really like we got to follow their entire, well, not really their entire, because of the, legend stuff. It cuts off for Jaina at a certain point and the boys, stuff happens.
We get enough.
Yeah, but we get enough. It really got to see how they grew and progressed. And I mean, the Solo kids were some of my favorites. And then Ben, being Luke and Mara's son, he's a lot younger than them. But in the same way, we got to see him, as a baby and then as a little boy and then as a teenager, and got to see how he's developing into his own person as well.
Yeah. And for me, they signaled that desire from fans and both Lucasfilm, the story group, the storytellers, trying to continue that Skywalker bloodline, but through introducing new faces, new characters, new motivations, new desires, new personal flaws, and all of this stuff. It almost mirrors the classical Greek motif or any kind of mythology you break down. You see, like, for example, in Greece, right, if there is a worship of Hercules, which they had statues and they would have temples to him and worship him. If you have a perfect role model that you use a myth to teach the kids, and, the worshippers are also sort of ancient fans who are infatuated with the hero, with the story, you want part two, always. Yeah. You want to revisit. You want to come back to this character and put them in new strife, in new battles, in new transformational experiences where at one point, right, some of the fans were saying, well, Luke in The Last Jedi, he's not the Luke that we remember and love. That's what mythology does oftentimes. It twists and turns your favorite hero to a point where you don't want to meet them anymore. But for me, the new Skywalker kids, they were like this fresh new blood. And instead of just repeating screenshots from movie to movie, like repeating patterns, no, you're taking the Skywalker bloodline directly, but you now have the opportunity to experiment and retool the story and put them in the entirely new conflict. Which brings us to the new Jedi Order. Guys, I'm going to give you a very quick synopsis of where Meg and I left off, and we're going to start discussing with our next book. So, we left off in The Enemy Lines, the second book in the duology called The Rebel Dream by Aaron Alston. And we left off with, there's a tipping point, a Yuzong Vong versus the New Alliance battle. The Jedi infiltration team on Coruscant, Luke Skywalker, his wife Mara, and the young Jedi Tenel Ka, they defeat the evil cyborg Jedi Eric Ismarin. Wedge Antilles, on the other hand, scores a tactical victory for the Alliance with his Operation Emperor's Spear. And by the end of the book, we have a tactical retreat from the planet Borleus. The shapeshifter Nia Newm, who both Meg and I, she's our spirit animal, she helps War Master Tsavong Law reveal the conspiracy amongst the Yuzong Vong elites. And eventually, the Vikishesh, the human turncoat politician, is trapped and she's defeated. She chooses to kill herself rather than to fall into enemy hands. The New Republic finally has much needed time to regroup and start formulating their next plan of attack. Now, this brings us to our today's discussion, the beloved, the controversial, I would say the absolute peak of the New Jedi Order series called Traitor. And it's written by no other than Matthew Stover, my humble opinion, a master storyteller. The book was released in July of 2002, and it takes place during 27 years after the events of the original trilogy. Very quick synopsis, just to remind you what happens to our hero Jacen Solo in the previous books. We know that he was taken prisoner after killing the Voxing Queen, these hounds which were bred by these alien invaders to specifically hunt and destroy any Force sensitives, including the Jedi. And basically the younger Jedi were sent to this Merkur mission, where Jacen's younger sibling, spoiler, huge spoiler alert, guys, please don't listen past this point if you're interested in reading the New Jedi Order. Okay, you've been warned. We know that in this Merkur mission, the younger sibling of the Solos, Anakin, falls. He sacrifices himself in battle in order for the mission to succeed. And Jacen Solo, his older brother, and also Jaina, they carry this heavy burden. We open up in this novel, The Traitor, with a very grotesque scene of Jacen Solo, who has been taken prisoner, being tortured aboard the Yuzong Vong ship. And this torture is being overseen by no other than Nomanor, the traitor. And, Jacen participates unwillingly in this ritualistic shapeshifter torture ritual called the Embrace of Pain. And at the same time, Jacen is being visited by this strange bird-like creature called Vergere, or I used to call her Vergere. I don't know what the exact pronunciation is. And he also experiences these new instructions in the Force from her. Now, for many years, Meg, fans have been clamoring for innovations in Star Wars storytelling. Mm-hmm. And you wanted different? Boy, you got it in this book and in this series. What was your response to the overall, this very grimdark tone of the New Jedi Order books?
I think for me, I was someone who read the Bantam books in the 90s and was like, those are a lot of fun, but nothing changes. And it felt to me like the New Jedi Order was like, hey, so you guys wanted change. You wanted lasting consequences to your action. Here you go. Yeah. And there were parts I loved, and there were parts that absolutely broke my heart, like star by star. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, when I was checking out various books, even Intrusive Bakura, which I still love to this days, you got a taste of something different. Ooh, a new alien species, a new exotic planet. Luke, Han, and Leia, Lando Calrissian, they are put through a new kind of situation we haven't seen them before. So they were kind of glimpses at this universe. They were sort of like jigsaw puzzle pieces, but not quite forming to this one magnum opus story. And that's what New Jedi Order gave us. I remember specifically being fascinated with, first of all, how the books were marketed. You saw similarities in the covers between the trilogies and other books and all the emblems that they were using and the font types that you were seeing that, like, okay, I'm reading this one huge chapter where each novel is actually a chapter of this huge story, right? But also that it's one continuous storytelling, just like, you take a look at the Star Trek shows, particularly Deep Space Nine, which was very serialized. The plot carried over, unlike previous Star Trek shows, from episode to episode to episode. It kept building and building and exploring things. And this is where I really, really enjoyed about the New Jedi Order. And also the very different tone of the book, which we mentioned was very grim, dark, very like, this is unlike Star Wars. But Meg, what about this particular torture scene? And without jumping ahead in the novel, at this point in this scene, who is Vergere? What are her motivations? What's going on here?
Yeah, at this point, we don't know. When she was first introduced to us, she was one of the Yuuzhan Vong priestess's familiars, but then she turned around and gave Han Solo a temporary cure to Mara Jade's illness. So you're like, is she good? Is she bad? And then she shows up in Star by Star and she captures Jacen and turns him over to the Yuuzhan Vong. So we're not sure what her motives are here, especially she's telling Jacen, I want to help you. I just want you to come to understanding. And he's like, but you won't release me from the embrace of pain. So I think the beginning really shows what an alien world Jacen now finds himself in, and that even the people who claim to want to help him aren't going to get him out of here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's a very cool observation. It's Jacen in a no man's land. He's in a completely different environment, in completely different storytelling situation here. And I immediately ate it all up. I never questioned it for a bit because I think what pulled me personally in, I'm already invested in the character. I want to see what happens. And the moment that Vergere enters the scene, I mean, generally speaking, in this series, I almost had a reverie for her. Not because I like her. She's obviously very different from Yoda in Empire Strikes Back because her tactics are different, her methods are, she does despicable things. But it kept me wondering, like, what's going on here? Is there a grand, invisible lesson here hidden by this fog of war that we just haven't got to yet? Let's not rush to conclusions about this little creature. She's so mysterious and her actions are so enigmatic. What is she doing? Is she forging a new path for the Jedi single-handedly through this tortured boy Jacen and giving him the tool, the flashlight and darkness that all of the Jedi are going to start using later on? Or is she up to no good? But there was this constant sense of like, I was almost in awe of her because they really managed well, like veiling her with this mystery. So in a sense, she is kind of parallel to Yoda.
Yeah.
But what are her lessons? Do you feel that they are of any value to Jacen, regardless of what happens later on? Do they at the very least, do they help him survive?
I think so, because this first initial one, like in the embrace of pain, like it teaches him to push through pain, that like, pain, he's able to almost transcend it. And Tahiri almost had a very similar revelation in the previous book we were talking about, in the second Enemy Lines book, where she's just like, I've lived through pain, like I can handle it, like. And I felt like his time here in that first chapter in the Embrace of Pain was very similar, just teaching him, you can endure more than you ever thought you could, and that he'll have to.
To be honest with you, I have a little different take on this. I can't help but think of the entire aftermath, and I find her completely unsympathetic because nothing that she does ever is selfless or an act of goodwill. She always serves one and only creature in this galaxy, herself. Not the Yuuzhan Vong, not the Jedi, I would argue not even Sith, herself. and
Yeah.
she uses this boy. And if I had this kind of mystery there, when it was actually revealed to you, the blinders are off, and you clearly realize what's what, or at least you can try to deduce to a certain degree of success and say, "Oh, that's what she's all about." I was like, "You son of a bird-like feather!" Like I wanted to just strangle her. I was like so pissed. And once again, it's a testament to really good storytelling.
Yeah.
Guys, moving on in the story here. So we open up with this torture scene, and now Jacen is being implanted with this slave seed, and he's taken to labor on a seed ship. He shares this psychic connection to Duryam, and Duryam is a world coordinator. It's a giant living creature, which is actually a biological device used to build a new Yuzong Vong world and oversee all the living creatures living on top of it. To get the full gist of it, guys, you just got to read the books. Just trust my word. It's really awesome. It's really bizarre. It's really grotesque. Jacen toils amongst these slaves, and he witnesses the cruelty. He believes that the slave watchers must all die, and that Duryam, but the Duryam, this creature, it can't break the young Jedi's mind. Jacen is just too strong. He's too willful. He can hold his own. And they both enter into this symbiotic relationship. Now, more Yuzong Vong warriors arrive, and they actually select Jacen's ship as the world brain. Wherever Jacen is taken to, that location, that place where he's with another slaves, the Yuzong Vong elite decides this is going to be the world brain. In their language, I'm going to try to repeat this name, is Pazik Yazantar Altirna. And it's basically a ceremony to terraform the entire planet of Coruscant into the new Yuzong Vong homeworld. Jacen's symbiotic relationship activates his new powers. He's basically his slave seed that was implanted in him. His bond allows him to control the Yuzong Vong amphistaffs, their biological serpent-like weapons, and he actually is able to create his own Yuzong Vong armor out of them. He manipulates the slaves that he works next to into attacking their tormentors. There's an uprising going on there, heedless of all of these slaves' own survival. And Jacen actually intends to kill the immature world brain, but believes that there's a vision of Anakin that comes out of nowhere and tells him, look, to spare this creature, don't kill it just yet, because of the special bond that you share. It will come important later on. Vergere, a little bird mysterious creature, also compels Jacen not to go through with this murder and says, no, keep the world brain alive. And by the end of the scene, Jacen loses his consciousness. Let's talk about the Yuzong Vong technology here, because I'm absolutely fascinated by it. There are many Star Wars fans, but there are also many Star Wars critics. Some fans enjoyed the Yuzong Vong. Some fans were like, what the heck is this? Yeah. The new Jedi Order authors slowly unveil this technology as we move along further in the story. We begin with amphistaffs, with body armor, with the Villip communicators, which all the technology is based on biology, to the terraforming bogs and the coral skipper ships, which are grown, to war coordinator, and now the world brain, which is like, huh? At one point you scratch your head like, what the heck is this? This is very exotic. Did any of it feel out of place in Star Wars for you?
I guess by this point in time, no. I remember in the early books, just like, okay, they're fighting with snakes and the snakes can repel lightsabers. But I feel like once you get to this point, like you're over the halfway point. So clearly you've kept reading because you're interested in this. So I think by the time you get to the concept of there's a world brain, I was like, yeah, sure. Of course there is, because they have brains like in their ships controlling the movements of all the fighters. So of course they would have a bigger one that's in a whole planet.
Meg, specifically, what did you enjoy or what didn't make sense out of this technology? Once again, turning over to the major question, like, did it make sense? Did it implement itself successfully within the Star Wars, tapestry of storytelling and technology?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the Yuzong Vong stuff made more sense than others. I think like their body modifications made more sense to me, the way that they would like remove an arm and then put like basically a prosthetic on, but it's like a
Hmm.
creature in and of itself. Made more sense to me than like the coral skippers, which are basically just a hunk of rock and they're propelled by the Jovan basils. And that was
Hmm.
so I guess like the smaller it was, the easier it was for me to accept. And like the bigger it became, the more I was like, wait a minute, but how does this work?
Yeah. I think to me the most jarring thing was the darkness of the story and the amount of like trauma that we see characters go through and the physical and just tormenting things happening there. I'm like, oh my god, this is pretty grotesque, pretty dark. But in
Right.
terms of technology, it was almost an amplification of the cantina scene in the original Star Wars: A New Hope.
Mm,
Basically, it's the bizarre, strange world, right?
yeah.
In a bizarre, strange galaxy, anything's possible. Nothing can be written off. But I think authors had to navigate their inner instinct and say, let's try this and see if this sticks or not. And if the New Jedi Order was a complete total narrative failure, if the authors weren't receiving all the accolades they were, and the fans were simply not picking up these books, and Del Rey would have said, let's scrap this. It's not working out. It's obviously is a success because eventually fans grew into it.
Mhm.
And as far as bizarreness of it all, I never questioned. I was like, this. My only thing was like, this is dark. I better get used to it. Just like getting used to concepts from Star Wars prequel trilogy. I was like, this is so
Mhm.
different. It's not what I imagined it to be. So, there was kind of like a learning curve in a way.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Jacen, uh, what is happening to him? Are his actions consistent given his very difficult circumstances?
I think for Jacen, I can see how past events and like his past understandings are contributing here, but I can also see how Vergere definitely has, her feathery fingers in the pot to push him towards things because
Yeah.
this whole like slave uprising that felt straight out of the Dark Tide duology to me, where he and Luke are uncovering information on Belkadan and Jacen becomes obsessed with like freeing the slaves, and that's one of his fears is getting that slave
Hmm.
implanted into himself. And so like on the one hand I see, that's sort of been Jacen's motivations all along. He wants to be the hero, but at the same time he questions all the
Right.
elements of the hero's path. But then I think I can see Vergere's influence in him deciding, well, I need to kill all of the possible world brains, but then
Hmm.
also is that the spirit of Anakin? Is it just a hallucination? And to me, I'm not sure. It did feel in a way like almost Jacen's inner self reaching out to him and being like, hey, show some compassion. You have a connection with this creature. Spare this one.
Yeah, I think what Matthew Stover has done exceptionally well in this book is to make a very, very specific into making the fan, the reader, try to deduce what is fact, what is fiction, what is
Yeah.
real, what is a mirage. And it's just so interesting. But before reading even The Legacy of the Force, I sort of started feeling that at this point, Jacen is unhinged. Something is
Mm.
different about him. Not necessarily broken, not yet, but he's a different man.
Mhm.
He's stepping out of the boundaries of what even the most radical, non-traditional Jedi would believe. Like, this is not the Jedi way, dude. Like, the pathway you're going is like, Anakin, I can't follow. Like Padme, like how she appealed to him. I would have appealed to Jacen the very same way. I'm like, dude, I don't know if I can condone this. This is too far. But at
Mhm.
the same time, I was still very sympathetic. I empathize with him because what could have you done in his situation? We're all
Yeah.
flawed. We're all humans. He is dealing with very traumatic, hard challenges in his life. Um, a different thing I wanted to ask you is how does he view the Force in this point? And could have the Jedi Order benefited earlier in the war if they knew what Jacen knows at this point?
Yeah. I mean, Jacen has been questioning his role in the Force and his perception of the Force like from the get-go.
Hmm.
And what Vergere is, continually reinforcing to him is that there is no dark side. There is no dark side. It is just the power of the
Hmm.
Force.
Right.
And like this is the bit where, this is pretty contentious. Like people absolutely hate this, people love this. And I think where I fall on the spectrum was that it felt very like Eastern religion to me. Like,
Mm.
that idea of
The yin and yang, right?
the yin and yang, like
Hmm.
evil has to exist. And almost that, like, what she's telling him is like, there is not an inherent divide in the
Right.
Force between the light side and the dark side. It comes down to how you use the Force. But then again, to say that, the what they called the dark side of the Force is just sheer power, I'm sort of like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that though.
Right. Right. Yeah, I honestly can't remember exactly how I felt in the moment reading the book, but my overall assessment now is like it's all pseudoscience, pseudo knowledge. It's
Mm,
not real. It's not based on any kind of tangible experience. Yes, not to be wrong, Jason and Jaina and all the kids in Solos and Skywalkers, they do experience a lot. Jason arguably goes through the most hardship during New Jedi Order than any other sibling,
yeah.
right? But at the same time, he doesn't have in his what he's 17 or 19 somewhere there. He's not even 20 yet. He
No.
doesn't have the lived in experience to implement all of his thoughts or all of his misgivings of what Vergere is feeding them into practicality of life and say,
Yeah.
well, yeah, the Force is truly one thing, and we truly need, to in order to separate the light from the dark, we need to have both. He just doesn't have, and that's the tragedy of him, that he doesn't have time, and he is inadvertently swayed and I think being brainwashed and manipulated because there's nothing that you can't do about just being a young person. When you're a teenager, you have this absolutism about you. I know the world. Adults can't tell me anything more about this. I figured this thing out. And by the time you hit 30, it was like, oh shit, I don't know anything about the world. And when you hit 40, it's like, you know what? I'm going to wake up every day, at least in my personal view, and each day is going to offer something different and new because I don't seem to know about the things that I thought I knew yesterday. Because the more convinced you are, the stronger your belief is. The next day you wake up and the harder you fall right on your ass when you realize, doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not how it is. And perhaps there is a greater balance to the Force, but Jacen is not off the right mindset or his teenage experience to get to that point.
Yeah.
Especially putting all over the filter of the whole Yuzong Vong war on top of
Yeah.
it.
I feel like Jacen in the new Jedi Order, he's questioning things, but at the same time, he'll be like, this is the right thing to do. And then that fails. And then this next book, he's like, oh God, what do I do? And so, it's like he comes to revelations, but then he's sort of ping-ponging all over the place. So it's sort of like, oh, buddy, you got to be careful here.
Hmm. Yeah, but at least let's give credit where credit is due. He is experimenting.
Yes.
I do appreciate about his personality. He's not dogmatic. He's not like, this is what the Jedi say, like a robot. We're going to do
No.
that. He's willing to experiment. He's willing to test the boundaries, which I think is very important to the formative, teenage years. In order to have your own persona, your own ego, your own set of beliefs, you have to test the authority in some way.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Jacen does here. Also, in regards to this dynamic between Vergere and Jacen, there are a bunch of fan theories which speculate that the Emperor manipulated Anakin Skywalker's mind, supplying him with visions of his mother crying out to him, and also of Padme's death. And that's what
Mm.
sets him off to the dark side. Maybe you've heard something vaguely about it.
Mhm.
Are Jacen's visions real, or are they all Vergere's constructs?
I don't know. And that's I feel that's what makes her such a complex character because like you don't know what her game plan is and you can't always pinpoint, oh, that was Vergere or like
Hmm.
that was the Force. And I feel like in Traitor, each time he has that vision of Anakin, like it's really a coin's cost, whether that is like his own mind, whether that's Vergere influencing him, whether that's the Force or what, because it honestly feels like each time it could be any of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Moving on in the story, guys. Jacen reawakens on Yuzong Tar, and he recognizes the former Coruscant in this new terraformed Yuzong Vong homeworld. His slave seed bond enables him to see the Vong in the Force. Finally, Eureka, it happens. He uses his Vong sense to escape with Vergere into Coruscant's deep undergrounds, and they actually end up beneath the destroyed Jedi Temple. Jacen repels her line of questioning and doubting himself. He believes that he is indeed a true Jedi. Now, the creature claims they are surrounded by the Vong warriors, and Nomanor is going to jump out of the corner, and Jacen unleashes his dark side and wounds the Vergere in the process. She still insists that the dark and light sides, they are no different. They're all the same thing, as you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the revelation shocks Jacen. He chases after what he believes is Anakin's spirit. He enters this cavern beast, which is sort of akin to a Sarlacc's pit. It's a huge living creature with a huge sack that basically just lures you in. And he hears a voice crying out for help. Is it hallucination? Is it real? He can't help this young girl through normal means, so once again he unleashes the dark side of the Force to rescue the child. He discovers more survivors inside. They're all lured in by this, cavern beast, and they all, fell into this illusion. And they all implement this terrible survival tactics inside. So basically, the rule is the last person to enter the maw, he's the one who is going to be fed to this creature first. And what pisses Jacen off and makes him really angry is that both this quote-unquote community and also the young girl he just rescued, they all accuse Jacen. He's like, hey, you're the one who's going in. You're the latest one to survive. And Jacen is enraged by this. It feeds his anger, and he makes the cavern beast think that all of these humans are just a poisonous waste. They're not yuck, they're not edible. And he forces the creature to eject them all. And at the end of this scene, Jacen leaves all the survivors exposed to other dangers of this new planet, Yuzong Tar, to their old dangers. He's like, he doesn't care about them. Bye-bye, see you guys. Now let's talk about Jacen's experience in this, what I call dark cave.
Yeah.
Do you think that Vergere foresaw this encounter?
I don't know if she foresaw this exact encounter, but she probably foresaw something similar happen, because it's like, Jacen, he comes into the situation and he wants to play the hero. And then he comes in and they're basically like, we don't want a hero. We want to feed you to the beast. And it just like reinforces his anger and leads to him, it's almost like the opposite of the slave uprising where he's like, we got to kill our captors and get out. And here he's like, screw you, I'm leaving you all behind.
Yeah. It's almost also the polar opposite of Yoda tricking Luke in the beginning on Dagobah to try to test the boy, test his patience. Here, Vergere is also very cunning, but in her own unique way, where she sees opportunity in every moment and she exploits it once again, I believe, to her advantage, which makes her just so much, you just love to hate her.
Yeah.
How much is Jacen a puppet to her versus his own personal circumstances versus what is possibly all of these events, the will of the Force?
Oh, that's a good one, because I don't know if Jacen is like, he's definitely being manipulated by Vergere, but I think his own personality is like compelling it, because if he weren't receptive to what she was saying, I don't think the majority of this would ever happen. She probably would have been like, oh, this one's a failure. Let me try to find another one. But instead, his interactions with her and the way that he's like not outright rejecting her means that she's willing to continue it. But at the same time, I do feel like Jacen's experiences here, in a way, it is like the Force is shaping him to be a tool that is needed later.
Mhm.
Which is like sort of dark and depressing to think about that, like, such horrible situations could happen to this young man simply because, well, we need, this to happen later on. You need to be able to defeat the big bad, and you won't unless you come to this strange understanding with yourself.
Mhm. I always appreciated all Star Wars media where the Force is not spelled out what exactly it is, what exactly it does. It's not exactly a deity. It doesn't exactly has like its own book of origin of how everything's supposed to transpire or
Yeah.
how the balance is even kept. It
Yeah.
almost feels to me like it's the universe's answer, a response to this new emerging conflict. Look, if this happens, I'm going to counterbalance with this. There's no moral ground here for, oh, what happened was happening to Jacen is good, or maybe this should have happened to the Jedi or not. There is no passionate judgment going on here.
Yeah.
It is what it is. This is what's happening to Jacen, and I think this particular novel penetrates the deepest spiritual core of the New Jedi Order series. Sometimes things are what they are, no matter what kind of personal feelings you try to ascribe, no matter what moral set of values you try to give upon it. It just happens this way. What happens to Jacen later on, it just is this way. Love it or hate it, and I will be forever grateful where the series starts and where Legacy of the Force ends. I think is just for me perfectly. Like I could not have thought of a better end to
Mm.
the Legacy of the Force. And like just looking at this particular set of events, I'm like, oh man, what is this thing? It just that's what makes this is the staying power of storytelling in general, not just Star Wars. Long after you finish the series, you come back to it and you flip these characters on their side and all of these events, and now you have this new light. I
Yeah.
read them when I was like in my late 20s. Now I'm 41. I'm coming back to this, and there's new hidden layers I find in there.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is you could sort of come away from the original trilogy and then the 90s novels with the view that like the Force is benevolent. But then I think the prequels and the New Jedi Order show us no, it's not completely
Hmm.
neutral. And that has good consequences and bad consequences. And it's that kind of thing where you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I actually, again, my personal critique, sorry guys to all the fans of the prequels, but one of my personal critiques was that everything is very, very on the surface.
Yeah.
Everything is literal. Everything is give it or take it. Even the whole idea behind the duel of the fates, is it Qui-Gon Jinn or Obi-Wan Kenobi, the one who's gonna survive the battle with Darth Maul is the one who's gonna pass on the knowledge. And again, a lot of it is just fan invented stuff. And they pull an extract quote from George Lucas just so it all makes sense exactly in the way that they want it. And I'm not criticizing that at all. That's how you personalize Star Wars. That's how you make it fill into your worldview and say, aha, this is what I saw in it. I do this very same thing. I could be accused of looking at Star Wars in my own very filter. We all do that.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to see that. Um, were Jacen's character flaws the cause of his perpetual descent into the dark side?
I don't know. It almost feels like a combination of his character flaws, just the events that occurred, almost like, yeah, this was exactly what Vergere was looking for. The right person in the right place at the right time, and they all come together for this.
Yeah, she's like, score! I couldn't have asked for a better disciple, right? Um, but speaking of Vergere, are any of her teachings not just a manipulation, but an impartial view of reality? Because she was, as we learned, she was a Jedi at one point.
Yeah. So I think she is someone who was an old Republic Jedi and then
Mm-hmm.
went off with the Yuuzhan Vong before the events of Attack of the Clones. Has spent decades with them. And so you have to think like, that much time alone, you're surrounded by these strange aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is like a kernel of truth in what she says. the whole idea of Jacen was so scared of falling to the dark side. And I think, in what she tells him that something external is not going to like trip you up and make you fall. Like it's your actions. Like that's so true.
Mhm.
With Anakin Skywalker, it's not like he was fated to follow the dark side, but he freaking chose.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some truth there, but then I think other things she says are very calculated.
That's a great way of putting it. Very, very calculated, right? Because I believe, she's almost like a cult leader.
Mhm.
She feeds the surface level BS to her followers. Obviously, in this case, she has only one follower, but still, the behavior, her patterns of behavior are very cult like. But at the same time, there's like this true believer in her. She believes her own hype. She strokes her own ego, like, no, 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 no. All these like little foolish Jedi on this side, all of these ancient Sith over here, and these intergalactic idiots trying to think they have the upper hand. I got all the skills. I got all the answers. I know how the force is. Guys, I figured this crap out. And I'm gonna teach this kid, and his actions are gonna basically ripple and change the course of this galaxy because I was the one who taught him.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I thought about her. Next, we are having a very, very emotional scene. Jacen goes back to the Soul Apartments. He reminisces. There's a lot of sad parts here. He's saddened by all the destruction, that reorganization of Coruscant, the planet that he's basically grew up on, and his uprooted reality. He challenges his own ideas about the Force. And he has this banter and then like this very heartfelt talk with another Anakin apparition. We don't know to full extent whether it's illusory or whether it's real. And Jacen eventually opens up about the things that he had done. He talks about his confusion, his loss. He talks about, he questions whether Anakin is real or not. And Anakin's spirit mirrors all of these misgivings back to him, and it asks, what is the difference? Life, the Force, they're all one. They're not different. And these are all talking points which are very much in line with what Vergere teaches him earlier on. Now, Jacen tells himself that Anakin is an illusion indeed, and he shuts him out. And he falls into a deep depression. He's woken up once again by Vergere, and once again she starts drilling his mind and questioning him, and eventually a party of Yuuzhan Vong warriors arrive on the scene. Nomanor, our favorite infiltrator and spy, he confronts Jacen, and he offers him an olive branch in the way of Anakin's lightsaber. And he says, look, come join us, convert to the Yuuzhan Vong religion, and we believe actually that you are an avatar. You're an incarnation of Yum Yamka, which is the god of war of the Yuuzhan Vong. And the Jacen, being a smart, cunning teenager that he is, he lies to them and he agrees to their terms. Now, would you characterize Jacen as a tragic fallen hero or just a bad seed villain in the making due to his beliefs but also his actions?
I think Jacen is pretty tragic because in the later things that come with Jacen, like Jacen self-justifies everything that he does. And like that feels like classic tragic villain to me.
Mm-hmm.
That you're like, I am the good guy here. And even people around him are like, no, number one, two, three, four, five, these are all bad things you did. And he's like,
Yeah.
yes, but it had to be done. Um, and I think there is that like cunning side to Jacen. Like we saw here, that Nominor shows up. He knows he's in an impossible situation. And he says basically like, okay, cool. Yeah, great. Plan. I'll do that. And you know he's lying,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like I think Jacen has finally reached the point where he is a survivor. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's not willing to sacrifice himself like his brother did, like other Jedi did. Like he wants to make it out in the end. And so like that's that element of Jacen in play.
Mm-hmm. I always thought that the more like poignant display of evil it's not necessarily this dark magic, this dark side, but the idea of the ends justify the means. I'm sorry,
Mm,
the means justify the end, right? Did I
yeah.
say it right? Okay, whatever. You get the point.
Yeah.
And with Jacen, once he starts playing, entertaining that idea, and slowly pushing harder and harder without end, he never has a relapse from this point forward, and which is going to lead to my next question. But that's the way I perceive it. I'm like, I don't know. For some reason, I was like sensing it right in the middle of this series. Like, we will never see the former Jacen ever again. He's forever
Mm.
changed because he's playing around with this idea that my cause is justified. What I'm gonna do next, no matter what, because we gotta look at the larger picture. You know, when the Nazi Germany was swayed by this crazed lunatic in the forefront, you took a nation of intellectuals, of people who built this country from ground up, its culture, its history, its philosophers who gave so much to the world. You made them quiet, you shut them up and obediently bow their heads down. But like, yeah, well, it's just, you know, the ends must justify the means. It's just, we just got to go along with this until things get better, which is a very, very
Mm.
tragic situation, right? And you could also kind of mirror that with what is happening to Russia versus Ukraine without going much into politics. You kind of could take a look at this and it's like, oh man, this is really terrible thing. And that makes the new Jedi Order so much more grounded. We're not just doing like, oh, lightning, dark side power. These
Right.
are very, very real things we're dealing here. What do you think was the war's impact on his teenage mind?
Yeah, I think for Jacen in the Young Jedi Knights books, he's like he's such a cute kid. He's goofy. He loves animals. And then this war starts and it leads to Jacen constantly questioning himself, questioning the actions of those around him. And then we get to Traitor where Jacen basically stops questioning and just goes forward.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like it's almost like in becoming a teenager in the new Jedi Order books, we see, Jacen loses that goofy side and becomes like this constantly questioning, which is just like a teenager's like. But once this is like the pivotal point where this is the point where he stops saying, like, well, is this the right thing to do? Is this wrong? Is that right? And he just does things for better, or for worse.
Mm-hmm. Without jumping ahead into the legacy of the Force, but once again, you know, I at this point I just can't help but make like draw parallels from one to another. You know, the absolute terror that would be unleashed upon the galaxy later on. I think a lot of it has to do with the war's impact on our consciousness, where you see so much death and suffering, and you start where you start questioning, losing your mind, and start questioning, what is this all for? Is
Mhm.
it worth fighting? Is it worth living? If none of it ends with like people are dying by millions, billions, right, in this conflict, and it inadvertently changes Jacen's mind to a point where it's like fight fire with fire. That's
Yeah.
all it comes down to. It's just like forget the individual, forget that every life is precious and matters. No, it's that's what makes you distant and cold and villainous, where you extract yourself from your surroundings, your loved ones, the people next to you, and you start looking at just like bugs on the ground from the distance. Like, no, I gotta protect my herd of sheep. I have to be the shepherd. I must do what is right. So again, it's not easy. There are no easy answers of what Jacen is or what he does. But one thing I wanted to touch here before we move on is Anakin's ghost. You know, the interaction with
Mm.
Anakin. You know, it's the experience of living with the family loss, the fallen comrades. You know, the fall of Coruscant, his home planet. Did you at any point feel that all of these things that Anakin is like missing, reminiscing, that Yuzong Vong would be able to replace with their faith and instill that into him instead?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
I think the sense I got in Star by Star was that, Anakin sacrifices himself to save the others, and he tells Jacen to carry out the mission. So like that's what Jacen's focused on, carrying out the mission. Meanwhile, Jaina goes off the deep end, steals Anakin's body back. Like Jaina wants physical closure, but Jacen just keeps going. And then it's almost like he sees Anakin's spirit here repeatedly because he never got that closure that the others got, for better or for worse, with, you know, retrieving his body, taking it back to his parents, having a funeral. And I don't think like the use and Vong stuff could ever replace that for Jacen. It's just, yeah, it definitely, to me, like as soon as he agrees to go on with it, the only thought in my brain was he's playing a role, because he would never, never buy into any of the crap they're selling.
Because I love like ancient mythology, like, you know, Scandinavian, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, like God of War. Now they have one for the years of one. I was sort of entertaining the idea, like, oh man, what if he kind of bought into it? It was like, yeah, I'm the hot new, you know, like poster child for poster boy, like perfect soldier for the Yuzong Van, because there's also that very spiritual motif on the battlefield. Right, the samurai, you know, the way of Tao, the way of the sword, how you're supposed to serve your master and also serve your people by, you know, fighting in battle and all that stuff. So maybe like a possibility is that maybe they rushed a little bit. Yeah. Maybe if the Yuzong Wan is like, hey, before we like transfer you from 5th grade straight to college, like we give you 10 more classes, we can like groom you for the role, and then eventually like, dude, look, you're like, you got the skills. Maybe they put him in front of like some kind of like elite Vong troops and army, and after X amount of years, like, now you're ready. And it's like, you know what? I am ready indeed. I'm gonna be the general of God of War.
They definitely jumped the gun here, because I feel like, you know, maybe if they've even gone the Tahiri route with him and like just kept working at it, because I mean that was pretty successful.
Tahiri, man, 1 or 2 more months is at the hands of the shapeshifters, and that's it. Bye-bye. Yeah. She's never coming back from that. I was surprised she recovered at all.
Yeah.
Next. There's a Jedi, Ganner Rizzotti, who also studied, one of the earlier Jedi who studied with Luke on Yavin 4. He's looking for Jacen based on the rumor that the young Solo had survived. He eventually finds and confronts Jacen on board of a New Republic camp ship, and both are actually taken prisoner. Because Jacen reveals his deception to this guy, to this Jedi, and says, like, I'm just playing alone. This is not really real. I'm still a good guy. And Nomanor, he suspects them, being a very experienced spy that he is. He's like, oh, this is what is happening. Okay, this disloyal little fool, I'm going to basically capture both of them. And that's what happens. And both Jedi are apprehended, and they're brought to the Well of the World Brain, which is the former Galactic Senate, where this world brain, this giant, massive brain-like tissue sitting there, and this is where this book is going to culminate. The Jedi, the friends, they formulate plans. Ganner offers himself as a sacrifice so Jacen could kill the world brain, and Jacen gifts him with Anakin's lightsaber. And the Jedi valiantly fights, he defends their position, he kills as many Yuzong Van warriors as he possibly can, but eventually Ganner falls in battle. Jacen alters his plans. Very suspect behavior here. He decides to enter this conspiracy of his own. With this, he convinces the world brain to scramble the Vong plans. He's basically thinking 3 chess moves ahead of a plan. He says, look, teach the Yuzong Vong to compromise this new galaxy. Teach them that there is a way to live together, and like this is not the way. We need to stop them in a more elaborate manner than direct confrontation. Vergere once again plays her own tune, and she manipulates Nomanor into revealing the location of his escape ship. She betrays the Yuzong Van and trapping him on the planet, while Jacen and her get to escape to the New Republic, and this is where the novel ends. Now, the novel is ripe with rich character development. We see Yuzong Vong lore, a lot of it. We see plenty of action and also a lot of dark and mature themes. What makes this novel a success or a failure in your mind?
I think Traitor is so different than everything else that preceded or came after it. I mean, it takes like the same building blocks of like the Yuuzhan Vong and their technology, but it just feels so different. I noticed in my reread, it's almost like Jacen's descent into the underworld because,
Yeah.
it's like start out in the embrace of pain and then goes to the world ship with that, baby world brain. And then we go on to the terraformed Coruscant, and then he goes deeper under. And then it's like he's in his parents' old apartment, but it's been completely transformed. And like that's the moment when they like pull him back. Like it is so like the locations and the descriptions are so vivid.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's one of the things that really sticks with you. And then just also the fact that Matthew Stover decided to go there with like all that Force philosophy, which is so different than anything else that
Yeah.
we've encountered, that it does like Jacen is in a strange land and you the reader feel like you're in a strange land as well.
Yeah, the descriptions of a Coruscant overgrown with this new strange vegetation is completely bizarre and amazing. And Meg, out of all the new Jedi Order books, where I'm basically winging it because I haven't read them in years, and you
Mhm.
have a fresh memory of them all, and you kind of supply me with all the interesting details, but this is the book that I remember the most.
Mm.
Well, I'm gonna ask you a question which kind of like pertains to specific scenes in the new Jedi Order. Guys, forgive me if you hear some sirens in the background a little bit, but whatever. This is New York. Stop. This is Coruscant in battle. It's like strife and war happening there. No, but it's such a visual novel, and specifically the scenes where Jacen is interacting with the world brain,
Yeah.
and with the way that he interacts with Vergere and the whole embrace of pain. I remember them so vividly that on occasion I just remember those scenes. I'm like, oh man, I need to go back and read this whole series because it was such a striking and visual novel for me. I absolutely loved it. But it also feels to you like it was a logical progression of the story, or was it like a completely 180? It's like, oh, Matthew Stover, hold on a second, this is so different.
Yeah, I guess in a way it did feel like a total we took a left turn into a new neighborhood because it was like Star by Star was the lowest of the lowest point. Then Dark Journey showed us Jaina coming out of that low point. And then Enemy Lines was like such a great, like classic adventure. Like our heroes are winning,
Mm-hmm.
they're accomplishing things. And then we get to Traitor, and you're just like, oh, well, I've descended straight down into the depths of hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt a bit of whiplash because I was like, I felt like, our heroes are finally on the up and up. They're doing good. And then you're like, and this is what Jacen has been dealing with the whole time.
For me, Jacen himself is the carrot. I was like this dull, stupid donkey, like easily following the course that Matthew Stover has charted. Is like manipulating the card. Like, Jacen, I'm in there. Let's go. That's why it felt seamless. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right. It feels so different and so bizarre. Like, holy hell, like never in the world I would imagine this would happen to Coruscant. But because I was invested and interested what happens to Jacen, I'm like,
Yeah.
just give me. Just okay, this happens. Oh, this happens. It's just this all of this bizarreness kind of made sense in a way. Because you're willing to take that journey with Jacen and with the author. Any negative things, any weaknesses in the novel that you wanted to point out?
It is pretty short. I think maybe before we even started, I mentioned this. I think it might be the shortest of the new Jedi Order novels. Like it is a very slim paperback. And sometimes I felt like there were a few things I wish could have been fleshed out even more.
Mm-hmm.
But on the whole, I feel like it tells like a really tight story. And sometimes with Star Wars books, especially as they tend to get bigger, they start to feel bloated. Like, why was this scene here? Why was this subplot included? And I don't feel like any of Traitor is extraneous weight. It's almost the opposite. Like there
Mm-hmm.
were times where I wanted a little bit more.
Yeah, it's almost like the duel of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Maul in the Rebels show, where
Mm,
it's so short and sweet and Kurosawan in a way that And it also requires you to understand what these two characters are. I mean,
Yeah.
the episode itself establishes their confrontation pretty well, but
Right.
you get so much reward out of it because it's short and sweet and because you understand their prior history.
Hmm.
So this is kind of like here also a short, sweet novel that if you're invested into the story up to this point, is just like boom, it hits you right in the head. It just has so much punch to it that I absolutely enjoyed it. Meg, is this novel and is this series up to this point what you would confidently advertise as the bold direction for Star Wars to your fans on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Because I think, going into the new Jedi Order series, it's like this is going to be unlike anything you have ever read before. And then, especially when you get to Traitor, like this book is one of a kind. I feel like, even compared to Matthew Stover's other Star Wars books, like this book is completely unique and like you will not see its like really anywhere else.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage anybody who's watching this podcast, anybody who's like entering into the larger Star Wars universe via canon books or expanded universe books. This is the ticket to greatness. This is like something, just the only criteria is like, dude, keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Again, the whole idea of bizarre, strange worlds is right there in the cantina of episode 4. It's not something you would expect or count on happening. It's completely just like completely created by these wonderful authors like Matthew Stover and everybody else involved in this series. You're like, oh my God, I would have never thought. But let's flip the page. Let's keep seeing where does this all lead. And I promise you guys, the reward is there at the end. Meg, there's one last great point that I wanted us to touch on is the Vergere.
Hmm.
She's the mainstay in the series.
Yeah.
Let's talk Vergere and her tactics / philosophies versus the Emperor's manipulations of Anakin in the prequels versus Vergere and Luke Skywalker's teaching of his students in the Jedi Academy trilogy and the New Jedi Order and so forth. Like, how would you compare it? How does she stack up? Is she more like the Emperor, where she's like basically doing the same thing but through Jacen, as Emperor did with the Anakin, or is she something that tries to reshape the chart a new course for the Jedi, as Luke Skywalker is working towards?
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because the Emperor Palpatine, in manipulating Anakin, he is, oh, I'm doing things for your best interest, Anakin. He's like the kindly mentor. And Vergere ends up being a mentor, but I'm not sure I would categorize her as kindly.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, she gives him these ideas, she puts him in these situations, but then she's like, you find your own way out, boy.
Yeah.
It definitely like a tough love approach. And so I guess that's the thing. Later books tried to put an interpretation on Vergere that I'm not sure I buy, because I think you're absolutely right. And Vergere is working for Vergere's best interest. She doesn't have a game plan of like, Sith resurgence. And I'm not even sure she has a game plan of like, I want the Jedi Order to change. She's just like, I think this is my solution to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of, I think she combines a bit of what Palpatine does with a bit of how I think Luke is trying to teach that,
Yeah.
She is a mentor, but she's not the supportive, kindly kind. And she's teaching Jacen, but she's putting Jacen in situations that I feel even Luke, who in the Jedi Academy trilogy sometimes shows a shocking disregard for like safety conventions. I feel like she does
True.
stuff that like even Luke would be like, oh, I'm not sure that's safe.
Yeah. I almost describe her as this Zen master who, again, it's not about morals, but I would argue she's a far superior and more cunning mentor than the Emperor always was. And I credit a lot of it to the very surface level, crude writing of the prequel trilogy. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Please don't crucify me. It's like, I'm the villain. It's like the whole famous scene in the theater when it's like, not from the Jedi, Anakin. He does the like evil turn like 15 times. Like, oh my god, how more obvious could you get, Anakin? It's like, I can help you save Padme's life through this new skill. I'm like, dude, are you serious? Versus what she does, what's very cunning about her is that she props up a very difficult question that rattles Anakin to the core, Jacen to the core, and she never supplies the answer. And that's
Yeah.
how you teach. You present a set of examples, you throw him into this environment, and whop, just a tap on the head is like, figure it out. That's
Yeah.
it. And that's what makes her so much more compelling and intricately written than Palpatine ever was. But versus Luke, I'm thinking to myself, like, the reason I brought him also into this question is, were there anything that Luke could possibly draw from the chapter of Vergere's novels and her wisdom and say, maybe, well, the rest is crap. It's obviously dogmatic just as well, evil to the core, but maybe this page kind of counts. Maybe we don't have a full view of the Force, and I kind of sort of need to open up my mind to it, as I understand begins to happen in the Fate of the Jedi, which I'm only 3 books in. I'm not an expert to talk about that particular series, but this is where Luke Skywalker and his son Ben begin to really test those grounds, like, all right, let's expand on this whole vocabulary that we have of understanding the Force.
Yeah, I think the new Jedi Order shows it, and it's almost like all the books show it, that just like the Jedi Order as a whole is so dysfunctional.
Yeah,
And you've
always.
got like all these different groups trying to do their own thing. And not to malign Luke at all, but I don't think he's a very good teacher or like herder of people. I think he's like the visionary, but then you need someone else doing the administrative work because, anytime that there's something pops up, wants to go off and handle it. And like, you
Yeah.
can't do that when you're the head of the Jedi Order. And so I think what he could take from Vergere is just that, like our understanding of the Force is so much smaller than the reality. And I think too, I haven't read Fate of the Jedi either, but I know that like he and Ben travel around, and it's sort of what
Hmm.
Jacen does after New Jedi Order, like encountering these different
Yeah.
Force traditions and showing you like, hey, the Force is so much more than what you've been teaching and what you've boxed it into. And it's like unfathomable. And like maybe that's where the Jedi Order has messed up at times, is in trying to basically write down, well, the Force is A, B, C, and D, and it's
Yeah.
not these things, when like you can't do that.
And it's surprising that we actually touch upon this in The Last Jedi, where Ryan Johnson addresses the Jedi's failure in the prequel trilogy. I thought it was a beautiful moment. I really, really cool. It fits like this, where Luke Skywalker questions this and why he also had failed. But unfortunately, sadly, tragically for Jacen, Ben Skywalker has the advantage of an older mentor, an experienced Jedi, Luke Skywalker, there along the way with him. Jacen
Yeah.
doesn't have anybody. He has
No.
this vile creature, this harpy sitting on his shoulder. Oh, no, you're doing good. You're all right. Just keep going right in this direction. Don't mind all the lava and pits of hell below you. Like, you'll be good. You're all right. Just keep going. So it was kind of interesting. The last question I have before we wrap up, and once again, Meg, thank you so much. I love these discussions with you. They're so cool. I'm very excited for us to continue and finish up the new Jedi Order. For you, and feel free to jump ahead here into any books up until the new Jedi Order's conclusion. What were some of the most emotional, absolute peaks for you? Whether it's an action scene, a character-defining moment, in general.
Mm. Well, in Traitor, especially Ganner's last stand. Oh my God, I love that scene so much. The like little speech he gives to Nominor,
Mhm.
and then just the fact that like what a baller. Like I think when you look on the Wikipedia page, they said, we don't have a number of how many killed, but it's probably the most. Like
Yeah.
that was such an epic moment. I love that so much. I think that Star by Star is like such a tragedy, but gave us so many of those like memorable scenes and moments that you remember afterwards.
Mhm.
And then even just getting to see different groups of characters interact in different novels, like some of the pairings I would have never imagined them, but then they were end up being so fun. Like
Mhm.
in Edge of Victory Rebirth, we have Corin Horn chaperoning Anakin and Tahiri, and I was like, Corin Horn, but then like their scenes together were an absolute delight. And then like in later books, Corin and Tahiri team back up again,
Mhm.
and it's like, wow, they work together surprisingly well.
Yeah, I have just these very visual scenes. I tend to stick to because I guess I'm a graphic designer. I love imagery a lot, even though I prefer books over anything else. Um, there's very specific scenes which I completely come back to and like re-envision in my mind, and they kind of compel me to like reread the entire series. One of them is when Tahiri Vela is being tortured
Mm.
and then being rescued also, and how everybody questions her. Oh, and is she now a sleeper agent for the Yuzong Vong, or is she still one of us, like one of the good guys? And also when Nian Yum enters the scene, I remember as I described to you, you were laughing like I was infatuated with her. Something about her is just so enticing, almost sexual in nature. I don't know what this is. Like the way you like just are drawn to her is this
Mhm.
very like almost a calm in demeanor and kind of like very cunning, very intelligent character with a lot of agency in the story,
Yeah.
and who's able to flip sides so convincingly, not abandoning her tradition, not abandoning her people, just abandoning their violent ways and being
Yeah.
able to stretch that olive branch and try to understand the other side fully and say, look, we can coexist with one another. It was also the embrace of pain. To this point, I remember that scene
Mm.
so vividly. I'm like, oh man, what are you trying to tell us here? In the context of Star Wars, like what's going on? Vergere and her. But also for me, one of the most epic scenes, like just that you described this character, this Jedi, for me was when Corin Horn, I believe he defeats, what's the general's name?
Oh, Shadow Shy?
Shadao Shai, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, for the Battle of the Ethor, gangsterness. I was like, oh my god, like this is like ultimate testosterone sausage fest dude moment there. Like, oh my god, bro, this is crazy. Like it was just so exciting, so well written. It was like a triple A Hollywood blockbuster action scene. And the final scene that I always remember, always come back to, is just the visuals are so striking because I really enjoy looking at Ralph McQuarrie's depictions of Coruscant, which I believe were developed for the prequel trilogy, not the
Mm.
original 1977 films, but the prequel trilogy. You see a lot of these areas in Coruscant which are open.
Mhm.
And I almost picture that version of Ralph McQuarrie superimposed on the final moments where finally the Yuzong Vong are, spoiler, defeated. And we see
Yeah.
the New Alliance troops are marching in, and the Samong line, everybody's there. They're sort of like dropping their flags down. It's like, that's it, we're down. Such a striking visual, amazing, beautiful moment there. And this is what New Jedi Order is riddled with, like packed to the brim, like this epic scene, this cool moment, this sweet character, that all of it combined, it makes just for an unforgettable experience.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this was our discussion. Oh, by the way, sorry, we got the last final question. Who is the traitor? Tahiri? Not Tahiri, I'm sorry. Jacen, the ghost of Anakin,
Mm. Mm.
Vergere, Nomanor? There's a lot of interplay going on with there that you could
Yeah.
like apply that term to.
I mean, you could pick so many people. I mean, the obvious one that comes to mind is that in the last section, when Ganner is looking for Jacen and then he finds Jacen, he's captured, he's like, Jacen is the traitor. But yeah, there's so many possibilities there.
And it's kind of left open, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, this was our discussion. I'm gonna side with the Vergere because, as you have learned, I just love to hate her guts. She's she's a traitor in my book. In our next discussion, we're gonna cover Destiny's Way by Walter John Williams. Guys, if you enjoy this podcast, please go ahead, check out Meg's channel. I'm going to drop the link in the description below. Please also go ahead and check out Stevie O's channel there. He's a beginner. He just started. He's amazing. Guys, I loved your interview there. After we finish recording, I'm going to actually go and finish that. It was really wonderful. Check out our channels. Please support our podcast. We're going to try to do this on a regular basis, continue our new Jedi Order discussion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll check you out later, guys. Take care, everyone.